Welcome to Shooting Straight with A1F.com. I'm Frank Miniature, the editor-in-chief of the NRA's America's First Freedom. Today we have the great pleasure of speaking with Greg Stube. Greg is the author of Conquer Anything, a Green Beret's Guide to Building Your A-Team. He also served in the Army, and most of the time in the Green Berets. Now, I'm going to put you right on the spot from the beginning here, Greg, because I know you have a lot to say on this topic, and it's an important topic, especially on Memorial Day. I'd like you to talk a little bit about the nature of sacrifice, as you're a person who was nearly killed in battle in Afghanistan, and I know you've lost a lot of good brothers over there and in other places. So this nature of sacrifice that we ask our troops to do, fighting for freedom as an extension of our freedom here, but really fighting for freedom abroad. What have you found out about that? What do you have to say about that?
Well, in terms of Memorial Day, it's a very mortal concept, but sacrifice on its face is a more top to bottom perspective that if you're willing to serve something that's greater than yourself, it's almost inevitable that you'll have to sacrifice in some way in order to maintain that. And you find out how much you believe something when you got to give stuff up to maintain the belief. That's the nature of sacrifice, small or great, in our lives. To me, it's important to maintain the honor that you start with when you make a commitment. And if you commit to doing something that has caused sacrifice in the lives of others, then it pays to not change your mentality when those bad things happen to you and when you wind up being the one to sacrifice. We can't keep whistling past the graveyard thinking it's cool to do as long as everything goes right, because our service is worth the sacrifice.
Right. You're fighting for the freedoms we have here, but you go abroad, soldiers go abroad, and they do things we ask them to do, and they come home, and I wonder, do they come home and feel unappreciated that the freedom they were fighting for and have sworn to uphold, and they come home and they don't always see it practiced here. They see it sometimes being outwardly attacked here, especially with regards to our Second Amendment freedom.
Well, we can all feel less than important at times, can't we? And and as much as we want everything to be perfect when we come home, particularly after we've endured conditions where the stakes are so high that the average citizen doesn't see or endure, our hopes can be high, but we have to manage those expectations and not think that everyone is going to agree with us all the time. So we have to stay the course and be the best citizens we know how. But as guardians of this freedom and of the Second Amendment, for example, I find it important to maintain yourself as at least an adult in the room, because your children may rebel. They may say things that are horrible. They may work against common sense and what's in their greater good, but it doesn't relieve us of the right to stand true to the core values and principles that will make everything okay in the end.
That's what worries me with this okay, we're supposed to rebel, and America has always been finding the best policies through our First Amendment, talking about things, and when it comes to even the Second Amendment, that's also absolutely true. But then again, I don't feel like a lot of this generation is taught enough about the Bill of Rights, particularly in the Second Amendment and what it means. Our mainstream media certainly isn't telling us the truth about what lowers crime rates, what makes us safer, that freedom actually works, and all of these big things about our freedoms. Then I see a person like yourself who went and fought for us, for our freedom, and for another nation, and was grievously wounded in the process and coming back and having to go through that process. Is that really understood, that nature of sacrifice and what you did? Do people really get what that freedom is?
I don't think we're getting to the core values as much anymore. As a society, when we were growing up, Frank, I think it was very welcome for someone to express an opinion And then it was welcome to retort, and it was welcome to have a balance of ideas. And now it seems like your value as a citizen is based on how offended you are by what you're hearing, and the action you take in being not just offended but outraged, which Dan Crenshaw says very well. Outrage is a failure emotionally and in maturity, and it should be deemed that way instead of a badge of honor for our activism, because we're getting nowhere without discourse and without the balance of ideas allowing us to stay true to core values. If I express an opinion now, I'm canceled, I'm hated, I'm rejected, and no one even cares why I said it or why I feel that way or if it's right or wrong in any context.
Right? I remember you telling me once that as a Green Beret trainer, you were in the business of creating country boys. You're in the business of telling them or teaching them how to use firearms and the firearms platforms, and you told me how much it actually benefited you that you grew up that way. You explain some of that?
Well, I think urban culture is creating a separation in the realities that we face as a society. Because uh, if what you do each day, if your version of practicality and reality doesn't involve God's green earth the way it was intended, then we get separated from real truths about our existence on on a planet which started as a natural world before we turned it into concrete. Um, and in special forces, I've seen how that separation from the natural world and what I would call reality, what we came from, I've seen how that causes a barrier to people being successful as a soldier or as a Green Beret. And no matter what someone's background, it was necessary to acquaint someone for the first time or get them reacquainted with nature and turn them into a country boy if they're ever going to be successful negotiating the terms that our natural world offers us and insists on. But we can escape those terms very easily in a city any day.
Uh, with guns, I would imagine that's also a part of it. You could, if you trained wrong, if you grew up wrong with firearms, you could certainly have bad habits that have to be taken out of you. But at least you would have a familiarity with those firearms, and especially if you were using an AR platform, you at least understand the platform you would then be using in the military, at least something similar to it, as Americans have always used something similar to what the military uses. It's part of our heritage. It's who we are. It's part of our freedom. Does that help or does that hurt, or what have you seen?
You know, what's coming to mind may not be exactly what you're asking, but it's becoming important to me that so many shooters are using firearms in a range situation in places that are relatively built up, highly governed with rules, left and right limits. Uh, Back to the country boy thing, if you grew up with firearms, there wasn't a formal range with rules. And there's full latitude on where you walk with that firearm and where you employ and discharge that firearm. And so a lot more is left to individual personal judgment uh, that falls on responsibility and accountability. And I think that's an important thing to assess as we go forward, promoting the right to have and keep and bear firearms and use in any environment. Because if you haven't walked with it and been in a place with full latitude where you can go where you want with it, point it wherever you want to, and there's no one there to correct you, then we're not going to have the kind of self-governance that will keep us where we need to be with our right to bear arms.
It's adherence to the NRA rules of gun safety, understanding where to point a gun, not to point a gun, that becomes intuitively, if you grow up that way. I grew up as a hunter. It certainly became a part of me that I have a hard time even pointing a squirt gun at somebody because of how my training was with those firearms and how much time I spent just hunting or shooting, target shooting out in the back 40. Yeah, that's, I would imagine that that kind of person who grew up that way with that ability to use guns, whether it's just target shooting with a 22 or it's with an AR hitting steel, that at least gives a depth and a background that would help them in their training more than just a city boy coming in with no familiarity with guns whatsoever.
Right. The culture and conditioning um, add to a comfort level. Not that we should ever be too comfortable with firearms, um, but we shouldn't be too uncomfortable, that's for sure.
So I'm curious. I remember you came back wounded from Afghanistan, and you had to spend a year in the hospital. And I don't even remember how many dozens of surgeries you had to go through in that process. And since then, you've helped a lot of veterans. You spoke to a lot of veterans groups. You've worked with a lot of them. How do we help them? How do we thank them? First of all, I always say thank you for your service, but I don't ever feel like that's enough, and I don't feel like I haven't served. I don't feel like I'm coming to at it from the right bearing or the right understanding of what they've given that I haven't had the opportunity to give. So how do we approach that?
I, for me, it's a little different, Frank. You know, I'm a weird duck. It's First, I would start with the veterans and our perspective as veterans. See, I don't think the upshot and the real benefit of my service is a benefits package through the VA. I don't like focusing on that, and I don't like the idea of leaning in and steering towards getting the highest percentage I can possibly get to leverage more money from the government without focusing on the kind of citizen I'm being. I can't provide a few years service and then expect the government just to take care of me. I'm the most fortunate person I know because I got to go and face the enemies of freedom as a chartered guardian appointed by the people, trained by the people and for the people. And I got to exercise that, fight our enemies, and come home alive to be a citizen in the place I swore was worth dying for. What a gift. And no one's shooting at me now. And I just get to be Joe citizen in a place that great. So I'm still interested in serving, and we don't need to think that America is great because of the military. It's not. We have a military because America is great. It deserves to be protected. We don't need to get that upside down. And that guardianship is a badge of honor, but we need to use it well as citizens. And the civil military handshake needs to be worked out a little better. We don't need space between the two. I think it was Thucydides. He said that a nation that draws too great a difference between its scholars and its warriors winds up having its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Um, I I think we need to be held to a higher standard as veterans, and I think the population should work a little harder at reception and reintegration without without a different look on veterans because we're just people that grew up around a family table too.
I remember the first time I heard you speak. You stood up there and said, "I'm not a victim. Veterans can't be victims. We volunteered for the service and the sacrifice that we gave." Is that about right, or?
If you volunteer, then you have disqualified yourself from being a victim. Uh, if you choose to be a victim when bad things are happening in your life, and they will, it's the human condition that things will go wrong. But I've learned that in life, you're disqualifying yourself from being an effective leader too, because people know if you can't handle your own stuff, you'll never be able to handle theirs effectively. So there's a lot of reasons not to let ourselves become a victim because it brings into question our belief in what we were serving in the first place. And then it can bring on this thing called sympathy, and you know how I feel about that.
No, you said it's a cancer. Yeah, sympathy will eat away at you if you feed on it for very long at all.
That's right. It lowers the common denominator of joy in any room. And even though sympathy can get people to pay your bills, do your work for you, have lower expectations for you, well, that may seem like a bonus in the short run, but it'll steal your soul from you. And no one will respect you in the end, not even you.
The story you once told, and it's in your book, and that humbled me more than anything, was the medic who saved your life. A person I think you actually failed out of becoming a Green Beret, but went back and tried again. Can you tell listeners that story?
Yeah, and I want to make a correction. You wrote that book too, Frank.
I helped you a little bit, Greg. That's all I did.
uh, Riley Stevens, he left an indelible mark on me because as a student, um, I had become, well, as a student, he was someone that I didn't approve of. And it was for superficial reasons because I had become so judgmental. I had a character assessment gun that told me whether someone was worthwhile or not from a distance. And the fault was mine the whole time. And I wasn't able to see the good in certain people until there was something in it for me. And when this Texas turd, Riley Stevens, that I hated, no matter what he did or said, if it was great, I thought it was just manipulation, and I wouldn't give him the time of day or respect. But then he graduated with the honors and became a better medic than me, showed up on the battlefield, and saved my life with a better trauma clinic than I had ever performed on anyone myself. And then, oh, how I loved Riley Stevens. It's funny how that works for us, and I don't think we should wait for those tragic moments to see the greatness in other people. We have to work to overcome our selfish nature as humans just to be decent people, much less a team player or a leader.
Well, it's in failure that you can learn to really grow, and you gave him that failure to grow over, grow past. So I think you gave him more of an opportunity than you take credit for.
Well, and you're right. I can't I couldn't go back if I wanted to and change the standards. No. Uh, but what if I was more professional and when I saw a student that I didn't like for whatever reason, what if I did my job and I mentored them and I actually told them what they're saying and what they're doing that I think is detrimental to their success? What if I mentored them, counseled them, but better yet, Frank, with all the commonalities we had serving this country, what if I loved him? Maybe I could have changed that outcome.
Wow, yeah, that's hard stuff because I know what he lost his life, didn't he?
He did. He died in Afghanistan, and I never got to thank him like I wanted to. I never got a long life of uh, surviving. Yeah, he's gone.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Greg, for what you did. I know you don't like being thanked so much for your service and your amazing sacrifice, but I'd like to thank you and everyone else out there who served to protect our freedoms back here at home.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I don't regret a thing about my service, but the great part about it is it really is one team. And if we came home to a country of people that didn't care and weren't doing their best, then would the next generation be willing to fight at all? So that begs the question, how are we living today? I'm not done. I know you're not done. And so we stand together as guardians for this freedom. And I thank you too, Frank.
Well, I know you do a lot of traveling, do a lot of speaking. Where can people find out more about you?
I have a website, gregstube.com. I encourage you to take a look at that. I want to come to your company, to your team. I want to talk about leadership, team dynamics, and resilience, and share lessons learned from the battlefield in a seminar capacity, a motivational speech, or even professional coaching.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Frank.